I must first of all express my sincere thanks to the organizers of this function for associating me with this session. I prepared a detailed background called Tamil Diaspora, a critical evaluation running into more than 90 pages. I requested the organizers to print it and circulate it among you before you go, and also to translate it into Tamil. I will not deal with all the points which are there, then the whole 2 days will have to be devoted to me. But I shall flag off few important points. There are 7.6 million people of Tamil origin scattered across the world. There are 35 million people of Indian origin who are scattered across the world, of which 7.5 million are Tamils. That is nearly 1/5 of the people of Indian origin are Tamils. They are concentrated mainly in Malaysia, in terms of percentage in Singapore, and in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, you have 3 types of Tamils. The Sri Lankan Tamils, who are as indigenous to the island as the Sinhalese are. Then you have the Malayalam Tamils, who went in the 19th and the 20th century to provide labor in the tea plantations. Then you have Tamil-speaking Muslims. These Muslims do not seek their identity in terms of language, but they seek their identity in terms of religion, and therefore I have excluded them from this. First of all, my submission is, we must be very, very clear about their legal status. We must not mix up the 3 types of people about whom I will mention. The first are those people who have taken citizenship in the countries in which they have settled. That if people have gone to Malaysia, they have taken Malaysian citizenship. People have gone to Singapore, they have taken Singapore citizenship. People have gone to the United States where they have taken US citizenship. Legally, they are the citizens of the host countries in which they have settled. So they would like to be called as Malaysian citizens of Indian origin, Singapore citizens of Indian origin, South African citizens of Indian origin, rather than people of Indian origin as a general term. The second are the stateless people. Stateless people are those who have not got the citizenship of the countries in which they have settled, nor have they retained Indian citizenship. They are neither citizens of the country in which they are settled, nor Indian citizenship. They are stateless. As stateless people, they don't have voting rights, they do not have an identity card, they are not entitled to participate in the election and all. And today, we have nearly 400,000 people of Indian origin in Myanmar, according to Singwi Committee, who are stateless. According to Singwi Committee, there are also 50,000 people in Malaysia who are stateless, but that, according to many people, is an underestimate. According to Ambassador Prakash Shah, who was Indian High Commissioner in Malaysia in the 90s, whom I met about 10 days ago in Pune, he said there are 110,000 people of Indian origin who are stateless. Hindraft calculates it as 150,000. Then third are non-resident Indians, Indian citizens who have gone abroad for work with Indian passport and all. There are 8 million people of Indian origin in the Gulf countries, and they are all Indian citizens. They are non-resident Indians, and when the economy shrinks in that country, they will have to come back to India. So we have to keep in mind these 3 categories of people. Then the other point, equally important, we must not generalize. The problems that the people face, the prospect that they have in future is related to the nature of their migration, their numerical strength, their economic clout, their educational attainments, and what is more, the majority-minority syndrome in the country in which they have settled. Thus, in countries like South Africa and Southern Rhodesia, even after our independence, they were subjected to various forms of discrimination. In certain countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Mauritius, etc., they share political power. In the United States and Canada, they are one of the most affluent minority groups, an object of envy and admiration. And nearer home in Sri Lanka, they became a merchandise to be divided between India and Sri Lanka in the name of good neighborly relations. Now, there are 4 waves of migration. First, of course, is the cultural phase, where Indian princes, priests, artisans, etc., left the shores of India, went to Southeast Asian countries, and created a new form of culture. They became the cultural ambassadors of India. And they had left an indelible imprint in all these countries. You go to Indonesia, go to Merdeka Square, the Independence Square. There's a beautiful statue of Gita-Upadesha, God Krishna driving the chariot, turning around and preaching Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. It's a Muslim country. 95% of the people of Indonesia are Muslims, but they are proud of the culture that they had left. In late 1950s, when India's relation with Indonesia had declined, Bhutto visited Indonesia and wanted to build up solidarity with Sukarno on the basis of Islam. But Sukarno told him, I am a Muslim by faith, but I am a Hindu by culture. Then the second phase was the colonial phase, where the Indians were taken under the British Raj to various countries of the world, to South Africa, to Mauritius, to Reunion, to Ceylon, to Malaysia, to provide labor for the plantations. And they led a very miserable life, a pitiable life. In fact, Gandhiji sent C.F. Andrews to Fiji. C.F. Andrews was the principal in St. Stephen's College. He's a Christian priest. And in Fiji, he reports the ratio of men to women was 1:20. For every 20 men, there was only 1 woman. And you can very well imagine the suffering that these women underwent. And for the report that he submitted on Fiji, they called C.F. Andrews a Dinabandhu, the friend of the downtrodden. And the Indian National Congress was very much concerned about the plight of these people. In fact, the last day in the annual session of the Indian National Congress was devoted to the problems of Indians overseas. Then we became independent. And when we became independent, the promise that Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi held forth, that we will care for people who are scattered abroad, could not be materialized. Because in many of these countries, in the name of domestic jurisdiction and sovereignty, they introduced citizenship legislation which it was very difficult to fulfill. So in Sri Lanka, the problem of stateless people arose. In Myanmar, the problem arose, and many other people were edged out of the country. Then the last phase, when the United States started attracting talents, when Britain became a welfare state, the economic boom in the West Asian countries, all these attracted the 4th wave of migration. And all of them have done fairly well in their own countries. It is from among these people that people like Amartya Sen, Professor Bhagavati, and various others arose. In fact, as Prime Minister Vajpayee once said, we can be proud of the achievements of these people. Muthaiya Muralidharan, the well-known cricketer from Sri Lanka, Zubin Mehta, the famous musician, all of them, they were people of Indian origin. So this is a broad outline of how they spread. Now, what are the problems that they face? One of the most interesting fascinating aspects of the Tamil diaspora and the Indian diaspora is how do they retain their identity, Tamil identity or Indian identity in an alien environment. They are in the United States, but they would love to be Tamils. They want to celebrate Pongal and various other functions and all. But at the same time, the children are born there, they're Americanized. They're more influenced by their friends. So how to retain Indian culture and at the same time adapt to new situations? So you have countries in which they have forgotten the Tamil language. I met Moses Nagamuttu, the Prime Minister of Guyana, 3 months ago on his visit to Tamil Nadu. He can't speak Tamil. In the conference that he spoke, he only mentioned 2 words, Nandri and Vanakkam. That's all the word that he used because he doesn't know. They can't speak Tamil language. In South Africa, you meet, they all speak English. In Reunion, they speak French. In Mauritius, they speak Creole. So, language, which is the basis of culture, one of the bases of culture, has lost them. Then comes religion. So, religion becomes all the more important. How to retain the Hindu identity in an alien environment. There, I think we in Tamil Nadu can play a very, very big role. Now, the question arises with the various problems. I will take it up. First is the problem of the stateless people. Now, if we have the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, which was started by Prime Minister Vajpayee for meeting representatives of the Indian community living abroad and also to discuss about their problem and how well that we can do. I have attended 3 Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, but the problems of the stateless people have not been discussed at all. The stateless people are those who are neither Indian citizens nor the citizens of the country in which they are like. And without citizenship, they suffer a lot. Now, this problem should be discussed. This problem should be discussed and found a solution. And this can be done only by the government of India. And I submit that one of the resolutions that we should do is that we should take up the case of the stateless people and do this thing. The second one that I want to mention is the present government, Narendra Modi government, had decided to amend the Citizenship Act of 1955. Because there are a lot of people who, as a result of persecution, the Hindus from Pakistan, Hindus from Bangladesh, the Hindus from Afghanistan have come to India. Some of them have come legally, but their passports have expired. Some of them have come illegally. And the objective of the amendment to Citizenship Act 1955 is to provide them with citizenship. But there is one community of people to whom the government of India is not showing much attention. That is the hill country Tamil refugees who have come from Sri Lanka. They are people of Indian origin. There are about 30,000 of them in various camps. And after the riots in 1977, 81 and 83, they sold all their belongings that had come to India. They want to take Indian citizenship, but their appeal have fallen on deaf ears. And the reason is that there was a circular which was issued in 1983 which said that the Sri Lankan refugees are not entitled for citizenship. But in the present context, when New Delhi is having a new look at citizenship, I submit that we should take up the cause of these poorest of the poor in Sri Lanka, the hill country Tamil who belong to depressed causes, and also plead for their citizenship asset. The next one is the disintegration of plantations and the movement of people from plantation to the urban areas. The previous session, Raja Kuppan spoke beautifully about it, about the 40 section of below the poverty line people of Tamil origin who left the plantation because the plantations got disintegrated. They were converted into golf courses, high-rise building, and various other things. They came to the urban areas without much compensation. And not only that, he also pointed out how they have been lumpenized and brutalized. This 40% of the people of Indian origin who are urban in our areas, according to Aliran, and Rajakupan also mentioned about it, is contributing to a lot of criminal activities. And it's a matter of shame for you and me and all of us that our own community people are becoming wayward in Malaysia. And this is something which the political community has to discuss. There are also problems with the migrant workers. They had the problem arose in Singapore, in Little India, about 3 years ago. Singapore is developing very fast, so they want labor. And this labor is recruited from China, labor is recruited from India. Many of them fall prey to the contractors who promise them an El Dorado, a heaven there, and then they go to these countries, they work very hard, sometimes their passports are taken by the employers, and on Sunday they meet in Little India, in Serangoon Road, unwind themselves, and that is what led to the rioting there and the police. Because the ethnic tensions in Singapore as in Malaysia was mainly between the Chinese and the Malays. 1964 riots was based in the Malay areas in Singapore. Similarly, in 1969 riots in Malaysia and all was based. But now the Indians have become a factor and all. And my own discussion with various people is that there is no mechanism in Singapore to sort out the grievances of the people. And nor the Indian nation is taking. There must be mechanism. If the grievances are genuine, then it should be sorted out. In fact, the problem first started with the Chinese. For the same work that they were doing in bus company, Malaysians and Singaporeans were paid more, but the Chinese were paid less. So Chinese who came from communist China went on strike. So the government came out with a heavy hand, deported a large number of them, arrested them, and you know very well in Singapore if you get arrested, not only you are given punishment, you are also caned. The most primitive, barbarous form of punishment is there. So it's in the interest of government of India that the genuine grievance, so these people are sorted out. The other problem is that many of them go to Singapore and Malaysia on tourist visa. The tourist visa period expired, but they continue to stay there. In fact, Najib Razak, who is the present Prime Minister, when he came to India a few years ago, he said, there are 30,000 tourists from Tamil Nadu who have come to Malaysia and we do not know their address. So the Tamil Nadu government and the government of India should spread the, after all in Tamil Nadu, we have a good communication network. We can spread the message through TV, we can post people in the airport. Do not overstay your tourist visa, then you will be subjected to various forms of punishment. What about the leadership of the people? Unfortunately, the leadership of the Tamil community has not been up to the mark. You know, the Malaysian Indian Congress, from its inception in 1946, there was factionalism between John P.V. and Devasa Sambandhan and Devasa Sambandhan and Manikavasakam and Sami Velu. There were occasions when the annual sessions of the Malaysian Indian Congress, police had to be called to restore law and order. And the leadership had been more keen to maintain the relation with the Malay leadership rather than protect the interests of the Indian community. I'll give you one illustration. During the Tunku era, there were two cabinet ministers from the Indian community, Sambandhan and Manikavasakam. From the time of Manikavasakam said only one cabinet minister, I'll be the cabinet minister, then deputy ministers. And the Sami Velu years were the years of failed leadership. Then the Hindraf emerged. The Hindraf emerged like a comet in the sky. It was from the people. It's a people's movement. It's a political tsunami that they did. And the question of desecration of temples and all. And it goes to the credit of Hindraf that they internationalized the issue of desecration of temples. But Hindraf also has got split. In the case of Singapore, the leadership does not emerge from the people. The last people's leader was Devan Nair. The leadership is chosen from up. So Vivian Balakrishnan and all those things, they are chosen from up and they don't represent the view. The last two more points and then first, the educational problems. Now, in my university, Madras University, 1857 is started. I mean, the first batch of graduates were two Sri Lankan Tamils, Vishwanatha Pillai and Thamodaran Pillai. Madras, Laila College, St. Joseph's College, Christian College, all of them have attracted large number of students from overseas. In fact, during the early years of independence, you could buy a railway ticket from Colombo to Egmore station paying 13 rupees, which will include the train fare from Colombo to Talaimannar, Talaimannar to Rameshwaram, and Rameshwaram to Egmore. Number of students used to come and all. But they still do come. But the problem which Vishwanathan did not mention, which I would love to mention here, is the fact many of the degrees of the Indian universities are not recognized in Malaysia. In fact, Malaysia does not recognize arts, science, commerce, business management of any university in India. We have a medical university to streamline the medical system with MGR Medical University. All medical colleges are affiliated to this medical university. They are the same exam, same degree is awarded, but the Malaysian government recognizes only the degrees of few medical colleges and not the other medical. There are medical degrees from Stanley Medical College and Tanjavur Medical College recognized, but not one in Chingalpet and Thani. So it's our duty, and we must make this input from this session. We must request the Government of India, the University Grants Commission, that the Indian degree should be recognized by the host government. And we must throw open our colleges, universities, etc. for those who want to come. Scholarship should be instituted and all, because education is the only way by which upward mobility could take place. And many of them, in the present context of deculturization that has taken place, is eager to retain Tamil culture, learn Tamil language, learn Tamil music and all. And I think we should increase the facilities, and that is where, since you run a lot of educational institutions, we must throw open this. Last one is, what is the contribution of the diaspora to the economic transformation of this country? Now, we all know when Deng Xiaoping liberalized the Chinese economy, the overseas Chinese contributed a lot. The overseas Chinese, it is said, contributed more than 75% of the foreign direct investment which flew into China since Deng Xiaoping came to power. What about the Indian community? First of all, as far as Southeast Asia is concerned, the Indians are poor. The richest Malaysian is an Indian, with a Sri Lankan Tamil origin. But Anandakrishnan is involved in 2G scam and all. He's a great friend of Chidambaram. From that you can know what his bona fides are. But most of the Indians are poor. According to the latest statistics that I read, 1.3% of the national wealth only is owned by the Indians. In Singapore, the per capita income of a Singapore citizen of Indian origin, Nathan, you can correct me, is less than national average. The expatriate Indians are doing very well. The upper middle class Indians are doing well. You go to any hotel in Singapore and stay at a good hotel in Singapore, invariably the girl who comes and cleans the toilet and sweeps the room will be a Tamil girl. So the Indians do not have the resources. So what we should do, we should attract wealth from those who have wealth. And the Chinese community has the wealth. And they can contribute a lot. They have the entrepreneurial skill, aviation sector, development of ports. Singapore can contribute a lot. The last, and then I end that thing, is the dual citizenship which has been introduced by the Government of India. I consider this to be a retrograde step. What does citizen mean? I am an Indian citizen. What does it mean? I am loyal to India. I pay my taxes. I exercise my franchise. Dual citizenship means dual loyalty. Dual citizenship means dual loyalty. To give you an illustration, when the United States went to war with Japan during the Second World War, there were 45,000 Japanese in the United States. All of them, they were detained. When India-China conflict took place, there were a large number of Chinese in Calcutta and Northeast India. Most of them were detained by the Government of India, thinking that they are not loyal to India but loyal to China. Today there is no conflict between India and the United States or India. But if a conflict arises, then the loyalty of the people of Indian origin in those countries will be suspect. Narasimha Rao, when he was the Prime Minister, was very clear. He told the people of Indian origin who were clamoring for Indian citizenship, no dual citizenship. But I will give you whatever else you want. You want to come long-term visa, you come. You want to acquire property, educational, whatever else you want to, we will give you. But the present government has introduced dual citizenship, which I think is a retrograde step. I was reading a small news item in the Hindu when Narendra Modi went to Singapore and addressed the people of Indian origin there. Singapore government discreetly told the Singapore citizens of Indian origin, don't attend, because they do not want their citizens to be pulled up to another country. Last, may I take 2 more minutes and I will end that thing. I mentioned about cultural diplomacy. There is something where we can play a very big role. When Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister, he went to Thailand. In Thailand, the Thammasat University asked him to speak, address the faculty and students. You go into Thammasat University, then our ambassador A.N. Ram, who was also Telugu, and Telugu bring them further closer. He whispered in his ears, it is the desire of every Thai to come to India, to go to Lumbini where Buddha was born, to go to Sarnath where he set in motion the teachings, and Gaya where he attained the Nirvana. You make an announcement that any Thai who wants to come to India on religious pilgrimage, they need not pay any visa fee. And Narasimha Rao made that statement. Next day, the whole of Thailand went gaga over it. Because here is one Prime Minister who is sensitive to our feelings. But do you know how many years it took for the government of India to implement it? It took 3 years for government of India. And not merely that, they said only Buddhist monks are entitled for visa, not for others. I thought only the universities do not function properly, but the Ministry of External Affairs is no exception. So I think this conference, we should make a declaration that all those Hindus who live abroad want to come to India on pilgrimage, all those Buddhists who want to come to India on pilgrimage, all those Christians who want to come to India on pilgrimage, no visa fee will be charged. And that will be a great contribution that we will be making. With this, I shall stop. Namaskar.